I want to kick off by asking you about what's happening in the country today. You've got the World Bank estimating over $4.6 billion worth of damage. You've got currency, frankly, in crisis, as well as an economy in crisis as well. But I want to address the elephant in the room, if we could, to begin with. Do you believe you're a criminal? Because a lot of people seem to think you are.
So far, I didn't discover myself as a criminal. Of course, I am reading about that and hearing, so I am trying to adjust to this idea, but I believe what I am trying to do and to achieve is within the laws of the country, so I'm not breaking laws, and to the good of this country, my country. As you know, the situation was not easy during the past 10 months because we had a bank listed on the OFAC, which created mistrust in the country. We had fires in our forests, which created climate change. We had a shutdown of the banking sector for 1 month, which turned this economy into a cash economy as the people lost confidence in the banks. We had the government declare a default in March 2020, which cut us off getting financing internationally. We had, like everybody, the corona. And finally, we had the blast in the port. So I don't think I am the criminal who did all that, but I am the governor who tried with the means we have to maintain the system, not to let the system collapse. We have succeeded with collateral damage. These collateral damages.
So a currency losing as much as 80% of its value is collateral damage?
The collateral damage was the black market that was created in the country. The 80% value decline is due to when you refer to the black market, but in fact, the weighted cost on the Lebanese as far as the exchange rate is concerned was much less because we have maintained interventions at the price of 1,500 or at 3,900, and we are running an inflation of 30%. This is the guideline for us. We lost by purchasing power, but not as much as the black market would indicate.
Sir, that might come as a surprise to a lot of people on the street that we've been speaking to, but I want to ask you that specifically in terms of that purchasing power. Essentially what we've heard, and I believe that you have said, is that you don't have funds beyond the next 2 months to sustain subsidies for basics. Where are we with that? Because people are pretty much on the verge of starving, no? And we've got a serious issue with, the currency. People just don't believe that it's worth what you're saying it's worth.
Well, first of all, the central bank is not the only institution running this country. You have the government, and I believe that initiatives pertaining to the assistance of the people must come also from the government.
You are, in fact, de facto part of that government.
I don't think so, because not all the governments, the government itself don't admit that, but the central bank has its independence. What we have tried to do is to contribute because we had by anticipation accumulated reserves, we have contributed in moderating the results of all the shocks that Lebanon went through that I have listed. And I think that we have done what we can do, but you have to admit, and we have to admit, that this is a crisis. And the country here is a dollarized country, so it doesn't work.
But sir, when you talk about it admitting that this is a crisis, why has it taken so long to do that? Why has it taken so long for you to say, you know, the buck stops here, we can't stop or we can't continue funding what is essentially a failed state? Because you and I have had so many interviews over the last several years, and every single time, very fairly, you said to me and again, you know, this is just me essentially tiding us over until we can get some kind of fiscal reform on the part of whatever government is in place. And of course, they didn't do that. They didn't manage to do that. But you knew what was coming. Why didn't you say, enough is enough?
I think I have said it. I said it with you also, if you go back to your interviews. But I don't.
Yes, sir, but you didn't resign. You didn't say no.
I don't have the authority, the legal authority, to say no.
That's what people want to know.
Yeah, okay.
Why didn't you resign when you knew that this was not working? The can had been kicked too far. You see what I'm saying?
You cannot resign in an environment of a crisis, because it would look like going away from the task you have to perform. And I want to remind you also that for a year and a half, the central bank had no board, and my resignation would have created a vacuum. And to remind you also that the situation in the country as we got to this crisis was not provoked by the monetary policy. It was provoked by other elements that I have listed, and it was my duty to try to moderate the effect. Before we had all these shocks, the reserves of the central bank were still increasing. If you look at the figures between the end of June and the end of August, you would see that our reserves went up by almost $2 billion. So the monetary policy was filling the gap that was needed to maintain this country afloat. And I couldn't say no, because legally, and I refer to Article 91 in the Code of Money and Credit, the central bank has to fund the government in case this government doesn't have other means to get funded. So
right, but you knew they weren't going to pay you back, and as a result of that, people can't get their money out of the bank. They don't know what their money is even worth anymore, and now you have $4.5+ billion worth of damages to Beirut that nobody can pay to fix.
I think first of all that the money of the people is not contrary to what is being said with the central bank. The money of people are with banks. In our relation with the banks, if you go back between 2017 and the end of June 2020, the central bank has injected in dollars net to the banking sector $11 billion, $300 million. So we returned all the money of the banks, and we injected over and above $11.3 billion. On the other hand, what we lent to the government is essentially in Lebanese pound. So we don't use the money of the people to lend it to the government, as it's being said, because the central bank is the institution that prints this money. We printed it without creating inflation. This also is a misrepresentation that is aimed at diverting the responsibilities on the central bank, while on the other hand, we know where the funds, the depositors' money went. It went essentially to fund the imports of the country. It is a misrepresentation to think that the deposits of the people have been taken by the central bank and given to the government, and that's why they don't have an access to their funds. Because in the period between 2017 and June 2020, we have injected net to the banks 11.3 billion, which means that we returned all the money they deposited with the central bank, and we gave them over and above as injection of fund $11.3 billion. The funds that we lend to the government are essentially in Lebanese pound, so we don't have to use any deposits for that because we are the issuer of the Lebanese pound. We know that the funds that were used for the imports are the reason why the banks have less liquidity. And on the explosion of the port, we were the first one to react by putting in place a credit at 0% for 5 years for those who needed money to repair. And we have also advised the banks to free up to $15,000 for those who are hurt by this explosion, and to give that to the depositors, and we are funding that. So there is a real misrepresentation, and it has been going for a long time. It's about time that someone looks at the real movement of funds in this country.
Are you saying this is a conspiracy? Are people out to get you?
I don't believe in conspiracies, but I think that it is I mean, we have all these accusations, if you want to say, but nobody takes the time to talk to us or to our people who can provide all these explanations, which are documented by official figures. So we have seen, read, heard a lot of comments, and those who are doing that should have the honesty and the courage to come and ask the questions and then decide whatever they want in their analysis.
Let's talk about the banking sector particularly. At what point are you going to introduce official capital controls? Because the banks themselves are already essentially using them, but it's arbitrary. And now people, especially post this crisis, need their money. Where is the money?
The money is with the banks. The people are using this money locally. They cannot do the transfers as they wish as before due to the situation. In a matter of 1 year, the total deposits in the country declined by $31 billion, which means people could have access to their funds. The loan portfolio declined by $18 billion. There were cash withdrawals equivalent to around $7 billion, and other funds were transferred.
I want to ask you about that transferring specifically, because, correct me if I'm wrong, the central bank should have record of every U.S. denominated transfer out of the country, right? So technically, you can follow that money, right?
No, because
you can follow it.
we don't deal for third party. The accounts we have at the central bank are in the name of banks. We do the transfers for the banks, but we don't know once the transfer from the account of the bank here to the account of the bank outside the country, how the funds move after that. We don't have access to that. And this is also a misrepresentation, because the central bank does not deal for third-party people.
When you think about that a bit more broadly, I mean, when it comes to the banking sector, I mean, you, in your prior iteration, before you were central bank governor, you were a banker. You understand what the business of banking really is about. I mean, greed is good in banking, but you were supposed to be watching them. What happened?
I think you are referring to our last circular.
Yes, I am.
Our last circular is saying the essential point in this circular is that the banks have to constitute 3% liquidity compared to their foreign currency deposits with their correspondent banks, which means they have to constitute around $3 billion. Now, whether they get it from customers or they get it from selling assets abroad or they get it from any other source, it is their problem. Our direction is that they should constitute that between now and the end of February 2020. And in case the banks who do not have this ratio will go out of the market. On the other hand, we have asked for the banks to reconstitute capital, especially after the default. All what we said is they can induce their customer to bring back in a certain form either 15% of the deposits if they are normal customers, or 30% if they are politically exposed personality or owners of the banks. And this we did it because we keep hearing that this type or this category of people have transferred outside the country funds that they earned from different financial engineering with the banks, not with the central bank. So we are going after this say, whether it is true or not, this we will know it. But whatever happens, what we are asking is that they have 3% in liquidity with their correspondent banks, because they will have to meet the needs of their depositors in terms of transfers, whether for schools or hospitals or paying their rents or having a credit card. And this is essential for the banks who want to continue to operate in Lebanon.
Governor, will you lead by example there? I know you have extensive investment outside of the country. Are you going to lead by example and reinvest in Lebanon?
First of all, I have a lot of investment and money in Lebanon, contrary to what is being said. Second, I am a man who worked outside the country, who made money and declared how much money I had before becoming governor of the central bank. I did it on television with documents. Third, I have always kept bringing money into the country, because this is the way I can pay for my living here or for whatever real estate I need to buy for family use or for personal use. And
are you ready, though, to repatriate more money?
I am ready, and I have been repatriating, but I have to tell you also that I didn't transfer out money from the country. I brought all my life money to the country, and my family also, who worked outside Lebanon, brought all what they made outside into the country. No, I didn't do a business because I am a governor, I cannot work, but I have invested in real estate, and I have my style of living here that is all funded by outside money.
Governor, given what we've seen happening since the end of last year, when then Prime Minister Hariri declared an economic crisis, we saw billions of dollars leaving the country, a lot of protests, and now this horrific explosion that has frankly set the country back. Would you be prepared to resign?
I don't want to resign because I am continuing my what I have in my mind as a strategy to get out of this crisis. And I'm sorry to disappoint those who are spreading rumors on my resignation every day. But I am.
But what would signal to you that it's time to go? Because I mean, 250,000 Lebanese are already saying, you know, we can't make it work in this country. Our money isn't worth what it's used to be. We have to leave. There's no economic opportunity. The country's been literally destroyed by itself. What's the signal to say, you know what, I couldn't make this work, it's time to go?
Well, you know, the Lebanese have the right to say that, but they don't have to say that it is the Central Bank of Lebanon that is responsible for this situation. We didn't create the deficit in the government. We have always called for a reduction in the deficit, and we didn't create also the deficit in the current account. These two deficits over the last 5 years have costed the country $81 billion. It is not the central bank that has created these two deficits. It is the duty of the central bank, according to the law, to do whatever is possible, and you can check Article 70, to maintain the stability and the continuity in the credit market. So what we did are regulations that have helped maintain for 27 years this country afloat while it lived wars, assassinations, civil strifes, and so on. So it is really unfair to judge Lebanon as if it was Sweden. Today, Lebanon has problems that are much more than any country can have. People are getting their money out of the banks. People are buying real estate. People are consuming.
Yes, sir, but not in
nothing
dollars.
is missing in the markets as far as goods. So it is not, the system is still here. But it is what I am trying to say, that it is unfair to analyze only from a monetary approach the situation of the country, to ignore the 1.5 million Syrians that are in the country and that have created more imports for Lebanon, to ignore the political tensions that have created pressures on investments in the country. And also it is really unfair to think that the Central Bank of Lebanon is the only entity and you have to that is running this country, and that therefore you have to pass on the central bank the responsibilities of the situation. It is not true that the Lebanese did not prepare themselves for this, because if you look in the past 27 years, they have been seeking for foreign passports, they have been seeking for investments outside the country, and they have been seeking for secondary residence, They have been able to open account all over the world, and they could do so because the system was still functioning.
It's a false system, though, right? It was a false sense of security, because essentially what you had is, allowing the banks to fund the government with zero risk.
No, it was not with zero risk. I mean, the banks have their credit risk committees. They are private entities that decide for themselves. They are not widows that went to buy government bonds. And now you want to blame the banks for doing that, and nobody is blaming the government for defaulting.
Here's a question. What happens next to the banking sector? When do we see consolidation of the banks?
After the end of February, as the circular we issued last week, the banks who don't have the solvency and the liquidity we have required will be taken over by the central bank, and those who can survive will remain. We don't want to bankrupt any bank because we want to protect the depositors' money.
You and I have talked many times about the role of the United States with regards to, frankly, the financial stability of Lebanon, in terms of remaining. I know you wanted to always remain within the international financial system. That was made, of course, much more complicated by the maximum pressure campaign on Iran. You once described this as this tightrope you were walking between the political interests of Hezbollah and the political interests of the United States as an ally of Lebanon, as a dance with wolves. How difficult do you think this has made your job?
Of course, it is not easy, but our target is clear, and we have issued a circular about it. We want our financial sector to respect the laws and the regulations of countries when we deal in the currency of this country or when we do correspondent banking with this country. We have maintained this course, and we have implemented in Lebanon the sanctions that were decided elsewhere. So to maintain the Lebanese banking sector integrated in the international financial sector.
Sir, before I let you go, I want to ask you to just respond once again to the question about capital controls, because the Lebanese currency ain't worth what the central bank says it's worth, and you got a lot of people trying to rebuild. They want to know what the timeline is for when they can get their money out of the bank. They want to get it out in US dollars. They want to get it out at its full value. Can you give us any sense about when that could potentially happen? Because we got people who frankly are starving.
The capital control issue is an issue that the central bank have requested since October. And there is now a law being discussed at the parliament. And also here, it is not the central bank who has authority to impose capital controls. It has to be through a law voted at the parliament. And we don't have this authority. So this is also another issue that people think the central bank has the responsibility. In fact, the central bank had no legal ground for that. The situation, economic situation in the country is not good. We know that. But here also, I don't know if you think that also the corona is our responsibility as a central bank, but it has hurt a lot the economy. As you know Lebanon very well, we are a country that derives its growth and its economic activity during the summer months because the Lebanese come back to see their families here and to spend the summer. which didn't happen this year because of airport closure of the corona, and it has aggravated a situation that already was not good. And the negative growth we have in our economy weighs more on the people, because we are an economy that lives on services essentially. And even larger economies and better economies than us in the region are suffering also.
Sir, given everything we've seen over the last year or so, as you mentioned, coronavirus, everything that's happened with the global economy as a result of that, and how that's played into the situation in Lebanon, it's a country that was already in financial crisis in October of last year, when I was there, as you say. Do you regret financial engineering, what many call now the greatest Ponzi scheme maybe ever?
Listen, first of all, this is not a Ponzi scheme as some have described it, because as I mentioned to you in the interview, we injected more funds into the economy, into the banking sector, than we took from the banking sector. And therefore, this cannot become a Ponzi scheme in the sense that we, the central bank, had injected funds, not taken funds from the banking sector, and then we didn't return them. We returned all the funds, and we returned over and above 11.5.
But don't you think now that this was really just throwing good money after bad?
I think now, and it's really hypocritical from people who are living on the income that we generated from financial engineering, to ask us to spend this money to make the country survive while they are criticizing so they feel good and trendy. So let's be serious. What is the income of Lebanon? Lebanon is dollarized. Lebanon doesn't have exports at all, or 2 billion a year. Lebanon doesn't have raw material. And Lebanon has to fund a dollarized economy so that the economy and the people can live. From where do you get the dollars? You get it from financial engineering with the financial sector. But it is not correct at all to say that the central bank took the money and didn't return it as a central bank.
But now, as a result of all of your policies, it basically means that a dollarized economy. So basically, though, as a result of all of your policies, a dollarized economy, as you say,
no, it's not true. It's not true. It's not the policies that made our policies made the dollarization in the country go down. What made the economy become dollarized is that Lebanon lived through a civil war for 20 years, and dollarization reached 90%. With the policies we did, we brought down the interest rate in the country, and the dollarization went down from 90% to 65%. So I am sorry, this is not the policies that we did that created dollarization. It is the situation of this country after its civil war.
Central Bank Governor, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining CNBC.
Thank you. Goodbye.